Good morning, everybody. My name is Steve Mellings. I'm the founder of ADISA. We're a UK certification body and test laboratory. And thank you for joining me this early on a Monday morning. We're here to talk about a certification for the legal services sector, which has the full title of the Legal Services Operational Privacy Certification Scheme, which thank goodness is shortened to LOCS23. And the 23 is relevant for the story which we're going to tell today because it was 2023 when the author, a gentleman by the name of Tim Hyman, actually put the standard to the Information Commissioner's Office for review as a certification scheme. And so it takes an awful lot of time, not only to develop, but actually to work with the regulator to get the criteria in these standards approved and being able to evidence compliance with UK GDPR. And so the story that we're going to tell today on today's webinar really is to hear from Sarah Carr from the Information Commissioner's Office. Now, Sarah is the senior case officer there, but is also responsible for the certification scheme. So I've worked with Sarah now for a number of years on various schemes. And she's really the fountain of knowledge from the Commissioner in terms of understanding how these schemes operate and what it takes to get them approved. So we're going to hear from Sarah to start off today. But we're also joined by two people who've gone through the process themselves. So Kaylee Jeffries, who's the lead civil clerk at 30 Park Place Chambers, and of course Orla Kelly, former practicing barrister, now the CEO of Briefed, which is a legal compliance and training platform. And both have gone through certification themselves. And from Orla's perspective, she's actually helped organizations become certified. So they've got really interesting insights into this. There is a slight apology from one of our speakers who unfortunately has come down with a lurgy. So Rowan, please get well. Miss you today, but we'll fill in for you without shadow of a doubt. So I'm going to invite Sarah Carr from the Information Commissioner's Office to join me on the stage now, and she's going to be talking about what the regulator thinks about certification schemes and what their view on the benefit of them is. So I shall just welcome Sarah. Thank you very much. And I will step off the stage now and over to you, Sarah. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Morning, everyone. Sorry for that. I'm just here to talk over GDPR certification schemes in more general terms, as well as about what the LOCS scheme went through to gain approval. So for those that don't know a bit about the ICO and what we do, so we are the independent regulator for various pieces of information rights legislation, including data protection law. I work in the Regulatory Policy Projects Directorate on the Codes of Conduct and Certification team. And as Steve mentioned, my role involves assessing data protection certification schemes when they are submitted to us by third parties. So I'm going to explain a bit about organisations' responsibilities and obligations under UK data protection legislation and how certification can help with that. So GDPR introduced the accountability principle. So it's always been expected that organisations are able to show us as the regulator how they are complying with data protection law. But UK GDPR brought in an explicit requirement that organisations responsible for processing personal data must be able to demonstrate compliance. And certification was introduced as a way for organisations to do that. So demonstrating that they've implemented appropriate technical and organisational measures as referred to in the law. So UK GDPR certification focuses on compliance of the processing of personal data connected with a particular product, process or service. So it can't be for individuals and it's not certifying organisations as a whole. And certification to an ICO approved scheme provides many benefits for your organisation if you process personal data. It can help you provide assurance to customers, to clients and the ICO that you're complying with your data protection obligations. The fact schemes are approved by the data protection regulator provides additional assurance. And if you are a data processor, you can use it to provide guarantees to controllers that you've got the appropriate measures in place when processing personal data. It reduces the risk of non-compliance and subsequent regulatory action. If you are meeting scheme requirements, you should be compliant with UK GDPR and then also be able to prove that. And we take adherence to ICO approved certification schemes as a mitigating factor when considering corrective action. That's written into our fining guidance. And also just on that to say, we only recognise certifications issued by accredited certification bodies appointed to operate the scheme in that particular instance. It also provides transparency by allowing your organisation's customers, both individuals and other businesses, to quickly assess the level of data protection of the product, process or service that you offer. So just a little bit more about certification schemes themselves. They are made up of three elements. So the certification criteria, and these form the standard that the conformity of a product or service is assessed against. So in this case, these are the specific data protection requirements relating to the processing, and that's what the LOCS standard is outlining. Then you've got the specification of audit and testing methods that are used by the certification body to carry out that assessment. And finally, the scheme rules for the management and operation of the scheme. So the ICO is only required to assess the certification criteria. Schemes are delivered by certification bodies accredited by UCAS, who are the United Kingdom's national accreditation body, and they assess the audit methodology and scheme operation as part of the accreditation process, and that's what ADISA have gone through to be able to operate this scheme. So these are the different moving parts and a bit about the various roles and responsibilities in the certification process. So the ICO's role is to, firstly, we had to set additional accreditation requirements for accreditation of certification bodies, in addition to those set out in ISO 17065, which are the conformity assessment requirements for bodies certifying products, processes and services. And as I've already said, our role is to approve the certification scheme criteria submitted by independent third parties. We have an agreement in place with UCAS to provide accreditation services as the UK's national accreditation body. Then we've got scheme owners. So they are responsible for developing the scheme and the scheme documents, including the criteria, the rules for the certification body operating the scheme, possibly including the audit methodology. They may or may not be the certification body, so what they're responsible for will depend on the type of organisation they are. And they must also ensure the scheme is updated periodically to reflect changes to the law, to guidance and feedback from certification bodies. Then UCAS accredit the certification bodies to deliver the certification schemes against the combined accreditation requirements mentioned here for up to 5 years. And in that time, they monitor certification bodies on an annual basis, so basically checking the checkers, and they can revoke accreditation where a certification body no longer meets the requirements. Then lastly, but by no means least, the certification bodies. So their role is to certify controllers and processors, depending on the scheme, against the approved criteria for up to 3 years. So following an assessment by them as to whether the organisation satisfies the agreed criteria. They inform the ICO before granting and renewing certification, providing us with reasons for that decision. They also need to carry out periodic reviews of certifications as a minimum annually. And they can also carry out a review if they are informed of any compliance issues. And they can withdraw certification where criteria are no longer met. And again, provide us with reasons for that. So the approval process that LOCS went through is set out on the slide there. So we've recently changed this process slightly to include a proposal stage, but this is what LOCS went through. So the certification team work with scheme owners and certification bodies during the development stage of a scheme. And once the criteria are submitted, we carry out an initial assessment, looking at things such as the general format of the documents and the language used, whether the scope is clearly identified, meaningful and not misleading to the people that are going to use that the criteria cover all aspects of the processing and relevant sections of UK GDPR that apply to the processing, and whether it allows meaningful data protection certification, which will be understandable to the intended audience, including data subjects. So once the initial requirements are met, the next step is a full formal assessment by the ICO's certification team alongside subject matter experts from across the ICO. So we assemble a group of experts to carry out a detailed line-by-line assessment of the criteria. And ultimately, we're looking at how well the scheme is likely to improve data protection compliance of controllers and processors and benefit the information rights of data subjects. Once we have agreed a final version, they are submitted to the Deputy Commissioner for formal approval, and we then publish them in a register on our website, and you can visit that register and see which schemes have been approved and click through to the relevant ones for more information. We then notify UCAS of approval. Once they've determined that the criteria are suitable for accreditation through their own assessment, certification bodies can then obtain accreditation to deliver the scheme that's based on those criteria. So to date, we've approved 5 sets of requirements relating to age assurance, age appropriate design, IT asset disposal, which is Adisa's other scheme that they own, training and qualification services, as well as this scheme for legal services. And we've got other schemes at various stages of development relating to financial services, online tracking, as well as more general schemes. So that's it from me. These are all our contact details and ways you can keep up with what we're doing. So thank you for your time, and I will hand back to Steve. I think we're taking any questions at the end. So
Thanks, Sarah. I've been very remiss at the beginning. There is a Q&A part on the platform, which I forgot to introduce. Dreadful, sorry. So if people have questions for the speakers as you go, put them into the Q&A and we can ask the speakers after each session. But there's also going to be a Q&A session at the end where we will be taking questions to the whole panel. So at the moment, Sarah, there's no questions for you. I've got a couple from via email, which we'll cover at the end, if that's okay. Thank you very much. It's really interesting to hear the depth of checks that you go through to actually get some of these schemes out into the public domain, which comes at a considerable cost and risk, I suppose, for everybody. So thank you very much for taking us through that process. I will stand you down for now. Don't go away. You'll be coming back on later on for the Q&A. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks.
Going to be joined now, if I can. We're joined by Orla Kelly from Briefed and Kaylee Jeffries from 30 Park Place. We're going to have, it was going to be a conversation with Rowan, but unfortunately ill health means that we're missing part of our conversation piece. So we're going to have a little chat. I'm going to interview them both. I've known them both a long time because they both become certified. Both were part of the pilot, as part of the process that Sarah went through. We at Adisa, as the certification body, have to be able to go out and pilot how we would audit against this. And we learnt a lot. All of you actually went through 2 pilots with us. Lucky you. Because sometimes the written word can be interpreted in different ways. We have to make sure we're consistent in how we as the certification body apply the written word. It's really important, the pilot stage. And of course with Kaylee, as a chambers, it was really important for us to actually go and understand how some of the nuances of chambers operated and the relationships that you have with barristers, of course. And that proved really invaluable for us at that time. Now, for both of you, you've gone through certification, and perhaps I'll start with you, Orla. We're going to talk the benefit statement. What value do you think the certification has benefited briefed, but also generally, what's your view on benefit for being certified?
Okay, so for the benefit of the audience, I have been, along with my team of barristers, auditing and advising barristers, chambers, and law firms on GDPR for actually 10 years now, 2 years before GDPR came in. And there's a trend on Instagram at the minute about what you were doing in 2016, and I was talking about GDPR, believe it or not. And having done now hundreds of audits, whenever the opportunity arose to have an ICO accredited process that we could audit ourselves and our clients against, we were thrilled, because it gives a level of certainty to the legal profession that didn't exist previously. And what that had, in the absence of an accredited standard, there was a lot of debate about what the GDPR legislation actually required, because of course it's very nebulous in some areas, and particularly lawyers like to have a bit of an argument about what was required. And so what this did was give a lot of certainty and reduce the work and effort required to some extent, because everyone actually was pointing in the same direction. So there's certainty, reduced amount of work. I have to say, I'm not a big fan of going through audits myself. I don't know how I managed to have to do 2 pilots, but I felt that it was an instance where I should walk the walk instead of just talking the talk. And so our own business went through the process as well, and it was great. It allowed us to make sure that we had every area covered, and I could have that peace of mind that in the event of a data breach, that we were also meeting the standard required, and that there was an ability to mitigate any fines or sanctions in place.
Thanks, Orla. And I think, Kaylee, just to bring you into line as well, and maybe before I go and ask a question, I'm going to pick up on something you said there, Orla. Kaylee, just talk through your experience as the Chambers, how you've benefited, you feel, from the certification, both internal and external benefits, perhaps.
So for us, obviously, it's quite nice to go through and just check that we've got everything in place. So for the audit process, it was great to go through and actually make sure we've got everything that we're supposed to have, and make sure everybody knows what they're supposed to do. They've had the relevant training, we've got all the policies in place, and that everybody's actually following the policies as they're supposed to. Benefits internally, obviously, making sure that everything is the way it is. It makes my job easier as the data protection officer to make sure that everybody does their training. They have to do it, because if they don't, we don't keep logs. Externally, it does bring with it the benefits. Like, I know that our clients know that their data is going to be safe. I don't think we're finding the full benefits yet. Once the awareness is more there around LOCS, it will definitely benefit us more. It's made due diligence forms significantly easier to complete, but I'm not sure we're at the stage yet where people will just fully accept it as a tick box. They've got that, I can leave them alone. But hopefully that will happen in the future.
And I think it's really interesting. I'm going to step in a little bit and talk about our experience of the pilots and talking with data protection lawyers and barristers, because we're not lawyers. We're the audit team are auditors, and they're trained in LOCS. And it was a point that you made, Orla, there about a level of certainty, because data protection law is ambiguous at times. Appropriate, or what's appropriate? And I think one of Sarah's points that she brought out in one of her slides was that they've determined that compliance to the LOCS23 is one way of showing compliance to GDPR. There are other ways, of course, because the law is so broad. And sometimes you need to be given some guidance, because it is ambiguous, appropriate. And I think that one of the things that we had as the pilots was sparring with lawyers on what legal compliance looks like. And it was, an intellectually stimulating process, but it was also interesting because different perspectives interpreted the law differently. And what this gives way is that roadmap, that level of certainty, all of that you mentioned, to know that should the worst happen and something go remiss, that you've actually got a very strong defendable position. Now, you mentioned there, Kaylee, as well, to lead back into awareness and interest in LOCS. It's still new. We only passed our UCAS certification in March of last year, because that took best part of a year. And so it's still a relatively new certification, whilst it's 2023. The gift is in the name, perhaps. Are you seeing more awareness in LOCS23, Kaylee, perhaps, at this moment in time?
I think it's definitely happening, but it's gradual. We've done our banging our drum. I know that local chambers have now become LOCS23 certified as well, which is great for us because the big thing for us is bringing the bar up to standard. But I don't think it's out there as I don't think as many people are aware of it as they need to be for us to get the full benefit yet. But as the awareness increases, I know that it will become a massive benefit for us.
And Orla, from your side.
I would jump in on that, but probably with a little bit of behind the scenes intelligence, because we help so many law firms and sets of chambers get ready. We probably have a first insight as to what the demand and the thought process is, and it's certainly seen as the gold standard. The conversations we're having with clients who've previously gone through GDPR audits or talked to us about it, or it's when they're going to do LOCS rather than if. And in fact, we have booked in projects for the entirety of this year because the people want to make sure it fits into their year, and they've got an opportunity to do it at a time when they're not conflicted time-wise. So the momentum is building. It's certainly the gold standard. It's understood throughout the industry, and I believe it will. I guess everything takes a little bit of time to develop. By this time next year, we'll be in a different place.
And just drawing out on one of the points that you made there, time. I'm going to come back to time a couple of times, no pun intended. From our side, we've seen a lot of interest from both from the initial announcement, the criteria has been passed, and it's over the subsequent sort of 18 months, 2 years since that actually happened. And time is one of the factors. Not only the time from interest through to certification is much longer in the legal sector, it would seem, than other sectors because you're all busy, but also the pressure on people's time and the reality of taking on something which is not viewed as a must-have yet, it's viewed as a nice-to-have. And that's been our observation, which is that there's a lot of interest, but the inertia is perhaps not because of desire, but because of just the availability of resource. And on that note, Orla, come back to you actually, because you are unique. You've been audited 3 times now, actually, twice during pilot, and I think your surveillance as well. But I think you've also taken multiple companies through certification now. For those thinking about LOCS23, could you give them your view on the experience of preparing for an audit? Nobody likes audit, but preparing for an audit. Any advice that you can provide and any tips?
I do think it's something that you need to look at as a project that will require some time. We have certainly, through having done this numerous times now, been able to refine our process that we can really help in a significant number of areas, reduce the time for our client, which is the point. We review the templates, review the policies, we draft anything that's missing. So if there's an ability to engage with your consultant, if you choose to have one, they should be making it a lot easier for you. I would say that where things fall off in terms of progress is particularly if your IT company isn't that helpful, because they're incredibly important to the process and they need to engage with you. So it's just making sure that they know well in advance what it is that you're going to be asking them for, which is really just a documentation of the security measures that they put in place. And it's not a bad thing to ask them about that, and certainly some of our clients have found that the measures they thought that they didn't have, and that in and of itself has been a benefit to those clients. But I think, Kaylee, you probably have a better idea of what it's like to go through the process, and maybe you have a different view to me.
Yeah, I mean, when we went through the initial audit, it was very intimidating. The technical language that's used is terrifying. Obviously, I had Ben from Briefed to hold my hand and support me through it, and he was just an absolute saviour.
It's not meant to hold your hand, Kaylee. I'll have to talk to him about that.
But no, he did. He was just absolutely brilliant. So when you first read it, it's just mind-boggling. Some of the language in there is not my everyday language. I wouldn't know where to start, whereas Ben could quite easily translate it into English for me, and then I'd understand what he meant. So that was fine. And suddenly being asked about policies that we've got in the background, but I've not thought about them, so they don't exist in my head for a while. Like, we obviously implement them day to day, but you don't think about reviewing them maybe as regularly as you should be. And the IT side of things, I work quite closely with our IT company, and I thought I knew most of what we had in place, but it was still really a fantastic experience to go through with them, everything to check that all of the things that we needed in place were there. When we came to our first surveillance audit, I didn't really know what to expect, but fortunately it was nowhere near as bad as I'd envisaged it would be. Because by that point you've actually got everything in place, and we've got our second audit next month. The second surveillance audit, so our third audit. And that, I won't say is a breeze, but I definitely feel much more relaxed going into that, because we know we've got everything in place, we know we've implemented it, and we know that we're maintaining it. And it is more now that we know we have a structured maintenance plan in place to make sure that everything is as it should be at all times. And I guess that's part of the LOCS process, is you do make sure you've got everything in place. So yeah, by the third round, we're good to go.
I've just seen a couple of questions. Apologies, there was a drop down which I didn't show. So Jack and Ben, I'll come on to your questions at the Q&A session at the end. As I've mentioned, it's new. Apologies, I'm not ignoring you. I was just inept. I don't like the word intimidating, but that's how people feel. It's a true reflection of, if you're not in the auditing sector, having somebody stand on your shoulder and say, prove it, it is intimidating. And for some people, it's overwhelming. How did the ADISA team, it's not a loaded question, how did the ADISA team work with you to help overcome that?
So actually very calming. There's no pressure. It is very much like, we will talk it through. We'll go through things with you. There's no, like, it's not going to be a pass or fail at the first instance. It is, we are reviewing things, and if there are things that need to be looked at, there is an opportunity to look at them. So you have your first audit, and then you have the next bit, like as in the documents taken away and looked at, and then you get feedback. But no, actually very reassuring, I think, is probably the right phrase. It wasn't, they took the pressure away. I envisaged somebody coming in and be like, no, you've got this wrong, that's it.
Yeah.
And that's absolutely not the approach that's taken.
Paula, from your side as well, I know you're not somebody who's likely to be intimidated, but did you find the process helpful, and was it viewed? And certainly, this is the way that we try and train. Is it's viewed almost as a collaboration to achieve and verify compliance, not necessarily just to be this auditor and auditee abrasive relationship.
But I think the best way to describe it is, everyone in the room wants there to be success. This is not. It's not your driving test or an exam where you have to, there's someone there to kind of really grade you and say, no, you don't get it. It's, the fact that a business organization, Chambers, will have put themselves into this place at the, demonstrates a significant commitment to data protection. They want to do well. They will have spent time going through 85 requirements. And so that piece at the end is simply, and I mean, Sandeep or any of your other auditors will give a report which indicates there's some things that you could improve on and give you an opportunity to do that. So it doesn't need to be, it requires a significant amount of work to make sure you're well prepared, but it's not an intimidating experience.
And, rest assured, we've got a 5-day audit next month for UCAS coming in. And even as an auditing entity, the team are not nervous, but they're putting the work in now to make sure that we're well prepared. So I think certification as a whole and auditing is something which is not. I think Rowan actually was the gentleman at your event who said, I don't mind an audit, which I've never heard before. Bless you, Rowan. But I think it is something which is just, you've got to do to be able to verify compliance in a credible way against a set of published criteria. Now, I think, just aware of time, we do have some questions we'll come on to, but I've got a sort of a non-LOCS question perhaps for you too, while we've got the opportunity. Let's talk about the broader legal sector in terms of technology trends. What are you seeing right now as being a hot topic in the sector? It's not just certification for LOCS, but broader. What are you seeing is something that we can perhaps have a quick chat about?
Well, I guess from our perspective, AI is the hot topic at the moment, and AI, people are typically thinking about it, they're going to lose jobs, etc. But how that intersects with data protection is about the fact that AI is typically managing data, and then we're having to quite heavily start to advise clients on how they manage AI tools within Chambers. But what's quite interesting to me, I guess, and from a kind of GDPR nerdy perspective, is subject access requests, where individuals can request from an organisation a copy of all of the personal data held by them, have been slowly gathering pace and growing in terms of volume throughout the legal sector since, well, I mean, it's always been something that's been available, but particularly in the past couple of years, people are aware now that it's a mechanism that they can use to find out information, and it can on occasion be abused by vexatious, for example, personal litigants, etc. What we're finding is AI tools are being used to draft subject access requests, which is fine. But then whenever a response is given, because if anyone in the audience is a DPO, you'll know there are exceptions. And there are ways that you can manage subject access requests to give people as much information as possible. But there's about 6 requirements for that you don't have to do it, and that you have to state that if you fail to give out of the information. But what's happening is litigants or personal individuals are using AI to draft responses to those, which appear very legalistic. They appear really quite intimidating if you didn't understand the legislation. I mean, this is a problem that's happening everywhere in the legal sector, where personal litigants, or potentially sometimes lawyers, are using AI to draft arguments for court that sound incredibly convincing and intimidating. And so in the realms of subject access requests, which shouldn't be taking up a huge amount of time for chambers or law firms, we're now finding that they're becoming incredibly complex due to AI being available.
Kaylee, at the coalface, are you seeing that yourself?
We're definitely seeing an increase in subject access requests going. People are using like ChatGPT and things like that, for instance, just as a way to find out what their rights are. And then from there, they're using that to advise themselves through the process of subject access request. So whereas previously you may have sent the files and then that would be the end of it, you get them come back again and again and again with further requests, or telling you you've got things wrong, just throwing curveballs at you that we've just not experienced previously. So it's definitely an increase.
It's not going away, AI, I think. As a technologist stroke non-technologist, it's one of those things at the beginning I thought, oh, it's just a passing phase, but clearly it is something which we're all going to have to get our head around. It's interesting that you're seeing it, people are using it to become more, or perceive themselves as being more competent, because they're relying on the output from a model. Quite worrying, that, because where's the expertise and sign off? But that, I guess that will remain to be seen. What I'm going to be doing now, if I may, Sarah, I'm going to join you back onto the stage. We're just going to open up to Q&A, if I may. We've got a couple that have come through from Ben. I'm going to read it verbatim because it's quite long, and it's probably, I guess it's probably one for the whole panel. What would you say to a law firm or a supplier who is trying to work out how to prioritize resources and is looking at various certifications and assessment to support the organization's data governance stroke data protection compliance stroke data security? Certifications like 27001, Cyber Essentials Plus, and assessment against the ICO's Accountability Toolkit Data Protection Audit Framework, with background to time and the pressure on time. It's difficult, Sarah, I'm going to ask you directly, but it's difficult for you because of your independent nature to actually say what takes the highest priority, I would guess.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously going to depend on the organisation themselves, but what I would say is that LOCS and the other schemes that we assess and approve, the whole point is that they reflect current ICO guidance. So we try to make sure when we're in the development phase and reviewing it, a lot of feedback often goes to scheme owners to say, you need to look at our guidance, you need to build that in. So I would say that if you were going for an ICO approved certification scheme, it is likely that the Accountability Toolkit, Data Protection Audit Framework, all of that has been baked into the scheme. So if you are satisfying the requirements of the scheme, you will automatically be satisfying those requirements, and be able to demonstrate that. So yeah, and what I would also add is that other certifications can be used as evidence. So obviously it would have to relate to the same processing that is being approved, that is being assessed as part of the LOCS audit. But if you've got 27001 certification, that can go some way to meeting some of the requirements of the LOCS scheme, also in the security elements.
Maybe one for you, Kaylee, when you're looking at prioritizing resourcing, because you've got a whole, I mean, I'm a hypocrite, you've got loads of certifications now, there's a whole SEC industry created on it. What was your decision making on what to prioritize, do you think?
So we did cyber first because it fed into doing LOCS. So when we had all our ducks in a row with IT and cybersecurity, it meant that when we then moved into doing LOCS, we already had that aspect of it dealt with, so that we weren't trying to juggle too many balls at the same time. It was literally get the cyber stuff done, move on to it, because it does feed in, and it addressed a lot of the policies that needed to be reviewed as well. So it just seemed like the sensible order. Just start with cyber and move on to data protection, because it goes hand in hand.
Or from a third party perspective, if somebody came to you with that question, how would you advise them?
Yeah, I mean, those are all good certifications, and they do feed into helping to meet LOCS23. My sort of different, probably more with my business head on, thinking about how I'm getting return on investment if I'm making a choice, is that the LOCS23 is the only one recognised and approved by the Information Commissioner's Office, which is the regulator, and it's the only one that will mitigate the event, in the event that you have a data breach, that will mitigate fines or sanctions. So to me, that's the starting point. It has the most authority, and it's the only officially recognised one. So that's probably where my head would go.
So I've got a couple more questions coming through. I'm going to answer Jack's, I think, myself. How would an organisation which has been certified not be certified as a whole? So there's lots of different scenarios. So they can withdraw, so they can voluntarily withdraw and surrender certification. That can happen at any time, of course, and there's a process that has to be followed. If it's part of an audit and assessment and they have a series of non-conformances, they're given a chance to take corrective actions and return to a compliant position. If they're not able to take the corrective actions or refuse, then they will lose their certification and it will be withdrawn by us as the certification body. And again, there's another process. So there's really probably two ways, which would be voluntary withdrawal and then withdrawal by ourselves because of a failure to meet the requirements. But there are processes during the audit process to put corrective actions in place. It's not a you've not passed, you'll never get an email from us saying that. It'll actually be more of a these are the issues that we found, please correct them. Hopefully, Jack, that answers your question. I think that was the context of it.
Can I just add, sorry, Steve, I think that was perhaps something that I'd said. So GDPR certification specifically relates to the processing of personal data and assessing that is compliant. So when I said that, it doesn't, you're not certifying an organisation as a whole. Obviously, the certification is awarded to the organisation, but it's in respect of their processing under the scope of that scheme. So in this particular case, that's the processing related to the legal client file. So it might be that there's other processing that organisation does that doesn't fall within the scope of the scheme. So we're not saying that, say if you were doing SARS for your HR processing for your human resources, and doing SARS within that isn't going to, obviously, it's going to help you do that, but that won't fall within the scope of the scheme. Does that make sense?
It does. Now you put that in, Jack, I think I misread the context. Sarah, you're quite right now that you've put that in. So it is in scope. So for example, Orla's certification is a data processor, so it's only the data processing activities which she does, as opposed to certification as a data controller, which, there you go, Jack, thank you. So thank you, Sarah, you corrected me. I've got an email that's come through for somebody who wasn't able to attend. And it's probably, I'm going to put this one to you, Orla. Surely as lawyers, we can self-certify and there's no need to use externals. And that's an interesting from our side, because as I mentioned earlier on, we've sparred with, when we're doing the pilot, we sparred with lawyers because you know the law and at least practice compliance with the law. What would you say to people about necessitating an independent assessment as opposed to doing it yourself?
So what you mean is that they could potentially meet the requirements which are publicly available, but not go through a certification process with ADISA?
Yeah.
That would seem like a strange thing to do to me. At the end of the day, it's an ADISA certified or certification body accredited certificate that allows the ICO to recognise it. To some extent, you would be doing all of the hard work and just not doing the last little bit to get the certificate and the accreditation that brings with it a significant amount of benefit. And I think the standard can be interpreted in multiple ways, and it really only becomes uniform and accepted once ADISA have gone through it with you and signed off on it. So I think that would be, you'd be trying to mark your own homework and living in a world of assuming that you're safe and well protected, and not, you don't know what you don't know. I think that would be a really foolish thing to try to do. I don't think that would make much sense whatsoever.
Sarah, just spinning that over to yourself, and I'm being careful how I word this. You mentioned the data protection penalty guidance. I'll get the terminology wrong for the guidance that you release about how you come to financial penalties. I think the phrase is that you use non-adherence to a certification as a aggravating factor. You know the wording which I'm trying to get across.
Yeah.
What's your view on somebody presenting a self-certified approach as opposed to a certified via an accredited body?
Well, it's not verified, is it? Like Orla said, 27,001, there's plenty of organisations that will align themselves to 27,001 and put all the policies in place. But unless you've gone through that audit process, there's no independent verification that that's in place and is working. And to say, perhaps the wording isn't as clear as it could be in the guidance, but it's taken the words of the law. That's why it's worded in the way that it is. But the intention was never that there's a two-tier approach, really, for GDPR certification. It was only ever envisaged in the way that it's described in the law, which is that it's operated, that the certification is issued by accredited certification bodies on the basis of criteria that have been approved by the regulator. And that is what we recognise. So in terms of mitigating factors, if you're adhering to that, if you are certified and you are maintaining that certification, then yes, we'll absolutely look at that as a mitigating factor. If you got certification and then just, like Kaylee was saying, then you didn't then continue to, you just wanted the badge and you didn't then take that seriously after that. I think we know you've got annual audits, so it would be difficult to get away with doing that. But if that were the case and you were blatantly disregarding the certification that you had obtained and following those requirements, then that's when it would be seen as a aggravating factor. In terms of self-certification, whilst you might know that you are complying with the law in your opinion, it wouldn't hold any weight. You might have things in place that you can show us, but you wouldn't have that certification in the same way as if that's been issued by an accredited certification body.
And I think I'm going to ask Kaylee a spin on a question that I've had here come through a little bit, because you mentioned some of the confidence and reassurance to pick up on Sarah's point that going through certification has provided for you personally and as a Chambers. The question is, what trends do we see from successful companies? I guess that's probably for us as a CB. But for yourself, Kaylee, what we found with you, I have to be very careful what I say here, it's live. It was your approach. You were very open to the process. You were quite willing to put yourself forward and be prepared to be audited and evaluated. And there was what we see as a whole is, I always say this, which is the mindset, not an us and them. It needs to be a collaboration to verify compliance. And that means that the audit process is designed to be like that. Prove it, show me. Is there anything else you could be doing? And the mindset which you've shown for me is exactly that as well, which is an openness and a willingness. From your side, have you seen? You're coming up to your third audit, you mentioned, so next month. If you were to give advice for people how not to prepare in terms of compliance, but in terms of their approach to it, is there any advice you'd give to people to say, this is what you would need to do, this is the headspace you need to be in?
I don't know. I don't know. There's nothing to lose from doing it, but there is so much that we have gained from doing it. So it was just, let's be a team, let's all work together and get through this, because it's only going to make everything better for everybody involved. Like, from my perspective, it's improved things in my various other hats as the data protection officer and IT lead. It's made my life significantly easier. So just welcome it, just embrace it. Like, honestly, it will make everything easier in the future for you, because once you've got these things in place, it's much easier to maintain it. And as long as you're doing it properly, it makes your life much easier. So just embrace it.
And I think all of, again, linking you into this, I agree with that, by the way. I think the hard work is the initial assessment, because that's, we don't know each other. The maintenance of it gets easier over time. And again, this is new, you're on your third audit. It'd be interesting to see how that audit goes, because I suspect it'll be a breeze, because you're so motivated. From your side, Orla, are you seeing companies being prepared, and is there a long journey for them to go on? Is there in terms of that first pass, when you as a consultant go in and say, let's do a gap analysis, are you finding that many gaps before companies come to us?
I think the companies will come to us with investment already made in GDPR and doing things correctly, and they will have believed very firmly that they've done that. The 85 requirements of the standard are, gold standard. So I think every client, and I'll include ourselves in this when we went through it, had to upgrade everything that we were doing, particularly in terms of policies and evidence of good practice, in it to be able to pass the audit. That said, it can be done quite efficiently and quickly if there's an ability to go, right, let's all work together and get it done, and that the IT company are on board. I see Jack's asking a question: are there any elements of obtaining LOCs you think firms might struggle with or prove challenging? And we haven't found that. I can think of one particular firm that struggled a bit because they changed their case management system in the middle of doing the kind of prep process, and that knocked everything back. But other than that, it is set up for success for law firms and chambers. A lot of work went into making sure it fitted both business models, and I know that I worked quite significantly in the development of LOCS23 for chambers, so that business model was understood and it was effective. So no, Jack, I don't think that there's anything in particular that you would struggle with in a routine law firm.
Thanks, Orla. And I think I'm going to come on to Louise's question, if I may. Probably back at you, Orla, to a degree, and then maybe Sarah. To what extent, if any, is LOCS23 beneficial to an in-house legal team of a non-legal business? So a legal team within a bank, for example. Would LOCS benefit them, do you believe?
Sarah?
So yeah, sorry. I think that goes back to the earlier question about whether it's the organisation or the processing that's being certified. So as long as that processing is in scope, so if it's providing legal client services to members of the public, well, to individuals, then yeah, if it meets the scope, then you can get certification to that. It doesn't matter what your other processing is, and that will be clear on the certificate that's issued to you. So that's all done from your side, Steve, in terms of the scoping of the certification and the audit. So yeah, definite benefits, I would say.
Some of the things that we've come across that we've had inquiries from businesses in the construction industry, which clearly don't fall under any kind of legal services. However, their in-house legal team will manage litigation and claims for accidents, etc. And there will be data processed through, including medical data, will be processed by the in-house legal team that is somewhat disconnected from the rest of the business. So that's a great opportunity for the in-house legal team to get all of their ducks in a row, make sure everything's in place in the way that it needs to be. And it's only the data processed by the in-house legal team that falls into scope. You don't have to, correct me if I'm wrong, you don't have to audit the entirety of the business. It's the legal team. And so it's somewhat of a small project that can be done quite effectively, but gives a significant amount of benefit to the wider business. And the legal team can also, it will probably do quite a bit of work in making sure that they are compliant with GDPR in any event. And this is an opportunity to demonstrate and showcase that compliance.
Agreed, and I think it's an interesting one because the scope is just to the legal activities of that team within a business. The controls, though, what we find are generally company-wide. So information security controls, for example, generally are the same for whichever discipline or activity goes on. It's more difficult for us to audit because you narrow your scope for one part of it and then you extend it for another. But it's the same principle. Are you processing data in an appropriate way? And therefore, can you create a defendable position should anything go awry? So the benefit, Lewis, is as strong for an in-house team as it would be an external team, as far as I'm concerned. I've got one question which came through. Somebody pinged me in a mail who couldn't attend. And it follows on from the trends question, I guess, from successful companies, Kaylee, and talking about the mindset of people. The question is, and it's going to have to be difficult here because you're on the call, Orla, should you always use a consultant to prepare? I'm going to give a precursor to that, and then I'll ask Kaylee to answer because clearly you did use a consultant. There's no requirement to use a consultant. Anybody can prepare and put themselves forward for certification, and that's a mandate under the UCAS part of what we've gone through. There's no guarantee of approval should a consultant be used. There's a but in all of this. The practical challenge that we've seen is time. And there's 85 criteria, there's supporting documents. There's an awful lot of information for people to digest and understand. And I think leading on to you, Kaylee, talking about when we spoke about the pilot many moons ago now, you said intimidating, which again, I'm going to reuse. Did you feel, if you were to do that yourself, how do you think your journey would have been if you hadn't have used an external?
Awful. Only because I wouldn't have had the time to go through each criteria myself and check it against every single policy that we have. Having somebody else do that and then come back to me and say, this is what you've got, this is what you need, saved me days, weeks, I don't know, lots of time. Even just the silly things like we do now, but we didn't have. There's so many processes we go through. We've got a policy for it, but we don't necessarily write down the process. So data deletion, I do it, and I've always done it, but I didn't have it written down. And it's those little bits that get forgotten that they pick up on, and they will say, you absolutely have to have this done. It's basically like having someone check your homework before you hand it in. It just gives you that little bit of extra reassurance. Sorry, Orla, but it does. And then when they were on hand, if I was having like a mild crisis of I'm dealing with this policy, it needs to be updated, what should the exact wording be? Being able to just ping it over in an email to be reviewed and just get a little bit of advice makes a hell of a difference, because it could take me hours to work out the exact wording to fit in with any criteria, but they know the answer. So if you're stuck on time and resources, absolutely bring in a consultant. And even if you're not, just bring in the expertise.
I'm going to keep Orla on mute because there's clearly a conflict of interest. But I'm going to say, from my perspective, in other industries that we certify, it also depends on the consultants that you have. And the bit that you've just described there, which is somebody checking your work, so important. We've seen companies be prepared by third parties, and the documentation that's prepared doesn't reflect the business as a whole. There's a huge disconnect. What we're seeing with Briefed, big yourself up, Orla, is actually that the documentation reflects the business. It isn't Brief's pack. It's actually the business's pack. It's relevant to you, and it's that intimacy that we've seen that can help the heavy lifting. And from our perspective, clearly we're going to check everything anyway, so it doesn't matter who's prepared you. It just makes your journey that much easier if somebody's gone before us to say they are going to ask for this. And the phrase that we always say is, that's nice, now prove it. So I think, and Orla, go on, if you want to, you probably would like to come in and give your view on the use of third parties, perhaps.
No, I can appreciate that not every business wants to use a third party. It can be expensive. And maybe if they're earlier on in their journey, or if they're a young business, they maybe haven't gotten all of the funds that they need to invest in that. So that, I mean, and I, started my business 12 years ago and couldn't afford necessarily everything that I wanted at the time. So I do appreciate that. I'm, having, done this now for 10 years, feel good about the fact that we do a good job for our clients. If I was going to big myself up, I think we're the only consultant that has any clients that have been certified by ADISA. Is that correct, Steve?
Yes.
Okay, so Briefed are currently the only consultant in the market that has had any
sales pitch, Ola.
Certified by ADISA, and I think that's almost all of the certified businesses apart from one. So, and there's a team of people behind me that does that and does it in a very committed fashion. So, thank you for the shout out.
Well, I'm just aware of time. So if any of the attendees have got any questions, now's the time to put them into the chat. While we're waiting for that time, I'm going to say, Kaylee, Orla, Sarah, thank you very much for your time on Monday morning. We did say in the green room before we went live, why did I set the time at 9:30 on a Monday morning? But we got through it, so congratulations for that. And it sets us up for a positive week. I think if I was just to summarize some of the points that came out, certification to LOCS23 takes away uncertainty, and it provides a roadmap for compliance when the law itself can be ambiguous. So it's really positive in that sense. The independent third-party audit by us, bigging ourselves up on this case, is the only evidence really that the ICO will take. So that internal audit will provide some degree of confidence, but it doesn't provide the insurance that you probably want. And the process, Kelly, from your view, and I mentioned when we did our chat last week on this, there's nothing wrong with saying the word intimidated. It is, it's not nice. We're intimidated when UCAS come in with their team. But when the process gets going, you know the answers because you've been well prepared. And in other words, it's no longer a test, it's just a conversation. And I think that takes regulatory compliance into a whole different area for us, because the certification means you're confident and you know what you're doing, as opposed to that I need to find something out, and you'll need to do that when you're under pressure. So it does provide that nice backdrop. Ladies, thank you so much for your time. We will distribute the recording once approved by yourselves to all the attendees as well. So I will stand you down for the rest of the day. To the attendees, thank you so much for your time this morning. Have a lovely rest of the week. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All the best.